Sports Love Media. Today, June 8th, 2025. Today we are going to do a live stream for our Major League Baseball games that are taking place between June 9th and June 11th of 2025. We're also, before we get into that, we're going to look at each and every Major League Baseball team and their win-loss record with the they have completed through June 7th of 2025. Can y'all hear me out there in YouTube land? Anyway, let's get into this. So let's start with the standings for every Major League Baseball team for the 2025 season so far through the first day of the season through June 7th of 2025. The New York Yankees, 39 wins, 24 losses. Toronto, 35 wins, 29 losses. Tampa Bay, 34 wins, 30 losses. Boston, 31 wins, 35 losses. Baltimore, 26 wins, 37 losses. Detroit, 42 wins, 24 losses. Cleveland, 31 wins, 30 losses. Minnesota, 34 wins, 30 losses. And Cleveland, it was 33 wins, 30 losses. Kansas City, 33 wins, 32 losses. Chicago White Sox, 2 wins, 43 losses. Houston, 36 wins, 28 losses. Seattle, 32 wins, 31 losses. Los Angeles Angels, 30 wins, 33 losses. Texas, 30 wins, 35 losses. Athletics, 25 wins, 41 losses. The New York Mets, 44 wins, 24 losses. Philadelphia, 37 wins, 27 losses. Washington, 30 wins, 34 losses. Atlanta, 27 wins, 36 losses. Miami, 29 wins, 38 losses. Chicago Cubs, 40 wins, 24 losses. St. Louis, 36 wins, 28 losses. Milwaukee, 35 wins, 30 losses. Cincinnati, 32 wins, 33 losses. Pittsburgh, 25 wins, 40 losses. The Los Angeles Dodgers, 38 wins, 27 losses. San Diego, 36 wins, 27 losses. San Francisco, 37 wins, 28 losses. Arizona, 31 wins, 33 losses. And Colorado, 12 wins, 52 losses. Now we've gone over how the standings are for each of the Major League Baseball teams for the 2025 season so far. Let's move into the meat of this discussion. So, on June 9th, we have Cincinnati versus Cleveland. That game will be at 5:40 p.m. Central. And it'll be Wade Miley versus Luis Ortiz. You'll have Miami versus Pittsburgh, which will be Yuri Perez versus Mike Burrows, scheduled to be played 5:40 p.m. Let's see. You have the Chicago Cubs versus Philadelphia, 5:45 p.m. with Matthew Boyd versus Undecided. Tampa Bay will be Boston versus Boston, 6:10 p.m. Central. Shane Baz versus Brayan Bello. Atlanta will be playing Milwaukee, and that'll be Chris Sale versus Freddie Peralta, 6:40 p.m. Toronto will play St. Louis, 6:45 p.m. Central. Jose Barrios versus Andre Palante. Hello, Eleanor. How are you today? You have the Athletics versus the Los Angeles Angels. That game will tip off at 8:38 p.m. Central. Will be Jeffrey Springs versus Yusei Kikuchi. You have the Los Angeles Dodgers versus San Diego. That'll be 8:40 p.m. Dustin May versus Nick Pivetta. Seattle versus Arizona, 8:40 p.m. Central. Emerson Hancock versus Merrill Kelly. So my picks for June 9th on the games. Cleveland will defeat Cincinnati. Pittsburgh defeats Miami. Philadelphia will beat the Chicago Cubs. Boston will beat Tampa Bay. Milwaukee will defeat Atlanta. St. Louis will defeat Toronto. The Los Angeles Angels will defeat the Athletics. San Diego will beat the Los Angeles Dodgers. Arizona will defeat Seattle. So, moving on to the games for June 10th. You have Detroit versus Baltimore at 5:35 p.m. Central is when the games will kick off. And then it'll be Sawyer Gibson Long versus Cade Povich. All game times that I list will be at Central Time in terms of when they're supposed to tip off. So moving on, We have Miami versus Pittsburgh, which will be Cal Quantrill versus Mitch Keller. You have Cincinnati versus Cleveland, 5:40 p.m. Andrew Abbott versus Slade Cecconi or Sassoni or Sachoni. Not sure on that, but anyway, you have the Chicago Cubs versus Philadelphia, 5:45 p.m. That'll be Colin Ray versus Jesus Luzardo. You have Tampa Bay versus Boston, 6:30 p.m. And you have Ryan Pepiot versus Lucas Giolito. Washington versus the New York Mets, 6:10 p.m. Mackenzie Gore versus Griffin Canning. You have Atlanta versus Milwaukee, 6:40 p.m. Grant Holmes versus Quinn Priester. You have the New York Yankees versus Kansas City. Hang on just a second. Sorry about the train horn. Clark Schmidt versus Chris Bubik, 6:40 p.m. Well, hello, baseball. I appreciate you joining me today. Thank you very much for joining me today. You have Texas versus Minnesota, 6:40 p.m. with Tyler Bashel versus Zebby Matthews. You have... I'm sorry about the train noise. You have Toronto versus St. Louis, which will be played at 6:45 p.m. Chris Bassett versus Miles Mikolas. You have Chicago White Sox versus Houston, which will be Shane Smith versus Lance McCullers Jr. at 7:10 p.m. San Francisco versus Colorado, which will be 7:40 p.m. Kyle Harrison versus Chase Dollander. You have the Athletics versus the Los Angeles Angels, 8:38 p.m. Mitch Spence versus Jose Soriano. You have the Los Angeles Dodgers versus San Diego. That'll be 8:40 p.m., which will be Tony Gonsolin versus Dylan Cease. You have Seattle versus Arizona, which will be 8:40 p.m. Brian Wu versus Brandon Pfadt. Or it's Pfaadt. Sorry if I mispronounced that wrong. Anyway, for the games on June 10th, here are my picks. All right, again, we have in those games, I'll go Detroit over Baltimore. I'll have Miami defeat Pittsburgh. Cincinnati defeats Cleveland. Chicago Cubs will defeat Philadelphia. Tampa Bay will defeat Boston. Washington will defeat New York Mets. Atlanta will defeat Milwaukee. New York Yankees will defeat Kansas City. Texas will defeat Minnesota. Toronto will defeat St. Louis. Chicago White Sox loses to Houston. San Francisco will defeat Colorado. The Athletics will defeat the Los Angeles Angels. The Los Angeles Dodgers will defeat San Diego. Seattle will defeat Arizona. All right, so now we have the games for June 11th. June 11th. You have Miami versus Pittsburgh, which will be at 11:35 a.m. Edward Cabrera versus Bailey Falter. Chicago Cubs versus Philadelphia at 12:05 p.m., which will be Ben Brown versus Undecided. You have Cincinnati versus Cleveland at 12:10 p.m. Nick Lodolo versus Logan Allen. Atlanta versus Milwaukee, 1:10 p.m. Spencer Schwellenbach versus Chad Patrick. Toronto versus St. Louis, 1:15 p.m. Undecided versus Liberator. Anyway, Seattle versus Arizona, 2:40 p.m. Bryce Miller versus Eduardo Rodriguez. The Athletics you have versus Los Angeles Angels, 3:07 p.m. J.P. Sears versus Kyle Hendricks. The Los Angeles Dodgers, you have them versus San Diego. It'll be Undecided versus Randy Vasquez, 3:10 p.m. Detroit versus Baltimore, 5:35 p.m. Casey Mize versus Zach Eflin. Tampa Bay versus Boston, 6:10 p.m. Zach Littell versus Walker Buehler. Washington versus the New York Mets, 6:10 p.m. Jake Irvin versus David Peterson. You have the New York Yankees versus Kansas City at 6:40 p.m. Max Fried versus Noah Cameron. Texas versus Minnesota, 6:40 p.m. Jack Leiser versus David Festa. The Chicago White Sox versus Houston, 7:10 p.m. Sean Burke versus Ryan Gusto. San Francisco versus Colorado, 7:40 p.m. Robbie Ray versus Kyle Freeland. And that's on the 11th. We're going to look at games also for June 12th. So for the games on June 11th, my picks are as follows. Miami will defeat Pittsburgh. Philadelphia defeats Chicago, the Chicago Cubs. Cincinnati defeats Cleveland. Milwaukee will defeat Atlanta. Toronto will defeat St. Louis. Arizona will defeat Seattle. The Athletics will defeat the Los Angeles Angels. San Diego will defeat the Los Angeles Dodgers. Detroit defeats Baltimore. Boston defeats Tampa Bay. New York Mets versus Washington. New York Mets will defeat Washington. The New York Yankees will defeat Kansas City. Minnesota will defeat Texas. Houston will defeat the Chicago White Sox. San Francisco will defeat Colorado. All right, so next we have the games for June 12th, which will be Washington versus New York Mets at 12:10 p.m., which will be Michael Soroka versus Kodai Senga. You have Texas versus Minnesota at 12:10 p.m., Patrick Corbin versus Bailey Ober. San Francisco versus Colorado, you have Hayden Birdsong versus Antonio Cinzalela at 2:10 p.m. Detroit versus Baltimore, 5:35 p.m. Tariq Skubal versus Dean Kremer. New York Yankees versus Kansas City, 6:40 p.m. Will Warren versus Cole Reagan. St. Louis versus Milwaukee, 6:40 p.m. Sonny Gray versus Jose Quintana. Pittsburgh versus Chicago Cubs, 7:05 p.m. Andrew Haney versus Jameson Taillon. Chicago White Sox versus Houston, 7:10 p.m. Davis Martin versus Framber Valdez. For the games on June 12th, we have as follows, or I have the picks as follows for winning this game. I have Washington defeating the New York Mets. I have Texas defeating Minnesota. San Francisco defeating Colorado. Baltimore defeating Detroit. Kansas City defeating New York Yankees. St. Louis defeating Milwaukee. Pittsburgh defeating the Chicago Cubs. And Houston defeating the Chicago White Sox. So just as a quick review, the games for June 9th, in terms of who I pick will win, Cleveland defeats Cincinnati, Pittsburgh defeats Miami, Philadelphia defeats Chicago Cubs, Boston beats Tampa Bay, Milwaukee defeats Atlanta, St. Louis defeats Toronto, Los Angeles Angels defeats the Athletics, San Diego defeats the Los Angeles Dodgers, Arizona defeats Seattle. For June 10th, Detroit defeats Baltimore, Miami defeats Pittsburgh, Cincinnati defeats Cleveland, Chicago Cubs defeats Philadelphia, Tampa Bay defeats Boston, Washington defeats the New York Mets, Atlanta defeats Milwaukee, the New York Yankees defeats Kansas City, Texas defeats Minnesota, Toronto will defeat St. Louis, Chicago White Sox loses to Houston, San Francisco will defeat Colorado, the Athletics will defeat the Los Angeles Angels, the Los Angeles Dodgers defeat San Diego, Seattle will defeat Arizona. For June 11th, Miami will defeat Pittsburgh, Philadelphia will defeat the Chicago Cubs, Cincinnati defeats Cleveland, Milwaukee defeats Atlanta, Toronto defeats St. Louis, Arizona defeats Seattle, the Athletics defeat the Los Angeles Angels, San Diego defeats Los Angeles Dodgers, Detroit defeats Baltimore, Tampa Bay defeats Tampa Bay loses to Boston, New York Mets defeats Washington, New York Yankees defeats Kansas City, Minnesota defeats Texas, Houston defeats the Chicago White Sox, San Francisco defeats Colorado. For June 12th, one last time, Washington defeats New York Mets, Texas defeats Minnesota, San Francisco defeats Colorado, Baltimore defeats Detroit, Kansas City defeats the New York Yankees, St. Louis defeats Milwaukee. Pittsburgh defeats the Chicago Cubs. Houston will defeat the Chicago White Sox. Those are my picks for who I think will win the games between June 9th and June 12th. And one last time, in case you missed it earlier, the standings for every Major League Baseball team for the 2025 season, which started in late March and goes through yesterday's finish of the games, June 7th, 2025. The New York Yankees, 39 wins, 24 losses. Toronto, 35 wins, 29 losses. Tampa Bay, 34 wins, 30 losses. Boston, 31 wins, 35 losses. Baltimore, 26 wins, 37 losses. Detroit, 42 wins, 24 losses. Cleveland, 31 wins, 30 losses. Minnesota, 34 wins, 30 losses. Kansas City, 33 wins, 32 losses. Chicago White Sox, 22 wins, 43 losses. Houston, 36 wins, 28 losses. Seattle, 32 wins, 31 losses. Los Angeles Angels, 30 wins, 33 losses. Texas, 30 wins, 35 losses. Athletics, 25 wins, 41 losses. The New York Mets, 44 wins, 24 losses. Philadelphia, 37 wins, 27 losses. Washington, 30 wins, 34 losses. Atlanta, 27 wins, 36 losses. Miami, 29 wins, 38 losses. Chicago Cubs, 40 wins, 24 losses. St. Louis, 36 wins, 28 losses. Milwaukee, 35 wins, 30 losses. Cincinnati, 32 wins, 33 losses. Pittsburgh, 25 wins, 40 losses. Los Angeles Dodgers, 38 wins, 27 losses. San Diego, 36 wins, 27 losses. San Francisco, 37 wins, 28 losses. Arizona, 31 wins, 33 losses. And Colorado, 12 wins, 52 losses. So there you have it. That is my perspective for Major League Baseball games for June 9th through 12th of 2025, plus the standings on how every Major League Baseball team is doing from the beginning of the 2025 season through June 7th of 2025. Thank you very much for taking the time to hear this live stream today on Sports Live Media. If you will, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the notification bell so you can be made aware when I'm doing these live streams, when I have sports action videos, when I have sports education videos, again, when I broadcast live, and when I have breaking news in the sports world. If you wish to subscribe to the channel, I would greatly appreciate if you do. There are two ways to do it through YouTube. One, go to www.youtube.com, the slash symbol, the at symbol, SPORTSLOV. Or you can go to the YouTube search tab and type in Bob Amin, BOBAMIN. You'll know it's me because I have Sports Live Media burned onto a basketball as my avatar. Also, I'm on Twitter X. My handle there is at BobAmin16. That is the at symbol, BOBAMIN16. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live stream. Normally, I don't do these on Sundays, but I thought I would try something different today. We will have other live streams in the coming days regarding various sports, whenever that can happen, and I will announce it as soon as I know when it's going to happen. Thank you again for tuning in today. I hope you all have a wonderful day.